He lived a quiet life in a small, peaceful neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and most days passed without any trouble. His house was modest but well kept, with a small garden in front and a few potted plants along the porch. It was a home that looked ordinary, unremarkable, the kind that could easily be overlooked. He liked it that way. He liked the peace. Every morning he would wake up early just as the sun started to rise. The world was calm at that hour, and he liked to feel the quiet before the chaos of the day. He would make a cup of coffee and sit by the window, watching the street slowly come to life. People would wave as they walked by. Kids riding bicycles, the mail carrier delivering letters. It was a routine, simple and steady, and it gave him a sense of control. Neighbors knew him as polite but private. He didn't attend neighborhood parties often, didn't chat for hours at the corner store. People would smile and nod when they saw him, but few really knew him. Some thought he kept to himself because he was shy. Others believed he just liked privacy. No one guessed the truth that behind his calm, everyday appearance was a man who had seen things most people could never imagine, who had faced danger in ways they could never dream of. Despite the peaceful life he had chosen, he wasn't naive. He knew the world could be harsh, unfair, and cruel. He had learned to trust his instincts, to notice the subtle signs that something was off. It was a skill he had developed long ago, and even though he rarely needed it now, it was always with him, quietly humming beneath the surface. Rumors started to circulate about a gang in the neighborhood, a small group of men who thought they could intimidate anyone. They had caused trouble before, vandalizing property, shouting insults, and making life uncomfortable for some of the neighbors. Most people were afraid of them, and their reputation grew with each passing week. At first, he paid little attention. He didn't look for trouble, and he wasn't the kind of man to provoke it. He believed in minding his own business and letting life pass by. But as the gang's activities grew bolder, their gaze started to fall on him. They didn't know why they had picked his house or why he seemed different, but something about him irritated them. Maybe it was his calm demeanor, his quiet confidence, or maybe it was simply because he didn't show fear. One evening, as he was returning home from the grocery store, he noticed a few of them hanging around near his property. They weren't doing anything overt yet, just loitering, leaning against walls, laughing loudly, and occasionally glancing in his direction. Most people would have felt threatened immediately, hearts racing, adrenaline surging, but he didn't. He studied them, noting their body language, their habits, the way they moved. Every little detail registered in his mind, not out of fear but out of habit. He carried his groceries inside quietly, locking the door behind him, and then sat down in his living room. From the window he could see them, still lingering, still testing the boundaries. His mind drifted briefly to memories from long ago, times when things were different, far more dangerous. Times when every decision could mean life or death. He had faced threats before, threats far worse than a few reckless gang members, yet he understood something very important now. The real strength lay in patience, in waiting for the right moment rather than rushing into action. That night, sleep came slowly. He lay awake, listening to the usual sounds of the neighborhood, distant traffic, the soft hum of streetlights, a dog barking somewhere down the block. But underneath those familiar sounds there was a tension, a subtle one, like the faint vibration of danger in the air. He didn't panic, but he didn't ignore it either. Preparation, he thought, was often more powerful than reaction. Over the next few days, the gang's presence became more noticeable. They left graffiti on walls, smashed a neighbor's mailbox, and shouted insults as people walked by. Some neighbors whispered about moving away, about calling the police, about avoiding confrontation, but he watched quietly, noting patterns, observing behaviors. He didn't intervene openly. He knew that rash action could escalate things, and he preferred to keep his advantage hidden. Despite the tension outside, he maintained his daily routines. He mowed his lawn, tended his plants, and went for morning runs. On these runs, he pushed himself hard, muscles straining, heart pounding, not for show but to stay sharp. His body was a weapon, trained for endurance and speed, honed by years of experience in situations that required more than ordinary strength or courage. It was a secret few would ever guess, and he intended to keep it that way. The neighbors continued to gossip quietly about him. Some speculated he was hiding something because he was unusually disciplined, unusually strong, or unusually calm. Others just shrugged, preferring to think of him as a quiet man who didn't bother anyone. The gang, however, grew bolder, unaware of the storm they were provoking. Then came the night when things escalated. The gang decided to target his house directly. Windows were broken, objects were thrown across the yard, and threatening messages were left behind. Most people would have panicked, called for help, or even fled. But he did not. He calmly assessed the damage, noting what had been done and what might come next. He knew that fear was their weapon, and he refused to give them that power. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering in astonishment. Some tried to offer help, but he waved them off, a small, reassuring smile on his face. "It's okay," he said quietly, though inside he was already planning. Not plans born from anger or revenge, but plans born from discipline and strategy. He knew that this situation required patience, observation, and precise action when the time came. As the night wore on, he made sure everything in the house was secure. Locks were checked, doors reinforced, and alarms quietly set. Every move was deliberate, almost ritualistic, a reflection of the control he had learned to maintain in all aspects of life. He knew that the gang would assume they had intimidated him, that they would not expect resistance. And that knowledge, he understood, was his advantage. When morning came, the neighborhood was abuzz with gossip. People talked about the damage, the audacity of the gang, and the quiet man who seemed strangely unfazed. They wondered how anyone could remain calm after such an attack. He went about his day as usual, running errands, tidying his home, and maintaining his routines, all the while keeping an eye out, watching, learning, and quietly preparing. He knew this was only the beginning. The gang believed they had tested him, perhaps even won some measure of respect from their perspective. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. They had only awakened a man who had survived far worse, who had trained his mind and body for situations that demanded precision, courage, and calm under pressure, and so the quiet life continued, seemingly normal on the surface, but underneath a storm was quietly brewing, one that would soon reveal that appearances can be deceiving, that true strength is often hidden behind a calm demeanor, and that the man everyone assumed was ordinary was, in fact, someone far more extraordinary than they could ever imagine. He finished the day with a long walk around the block, a ritual he had kept for years. The neighborhood seemed peaceful again, but he knew better. Danger lurked, not always in plain sight, but in the small, subtle actions of those who underestimated him, and he would be ready, always ready. No one could have guessed, as they watched him walk calmly down the street, that he was a man shaped by the most extreme experiences, a man trained to handle the impossible, a man who could, if necessary, protect what was his in ways no one could imagine, and perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. Strength. Real strength is not in how loud you are, but in how prepared, disciplined, and focused you remain when the world tries to shake you. And so his quiet life, at least for now, went on. But the stage had been set. The calm before the storm had passed, and the world was about to see that even the quietest people can carry the fiercest power. After the first attack on his house, the quiet man's life seemed to go back to normal, but anyone paying attention could feel the tension in the air. The gang had tested him once, and though they didn't see it, he had noticed everything. Every movement, every gesture, every little sign of aggression was carefully stored in his mind. He didn't act immediately. He didn't raise his voice or show fear. Instead, he observed, the neighborhood, however, was restless. Rumors spread quickly about the vandalism. Some neighbors called the police, others whispered about moving. A few brave souls tried to confront the gang directly, only to come back frightened and shaken. No one wanted to take the next step, and that silence only emboldened the group. They believed that the quiet man, like everyone else, would be too scared to respond. Over the next few days, the gang's presence became more pronounced. They roamed the streets at odd hours, laughing loudly and throwing trash in yards. Some nights they would bang on doors or shout insults from across the street. Each act was meant to intimidate, to test the limits of the people living there. Yet the man never responded impulsively. He kept his routines, his calm demeanor, and his awareness sharp. During the day, he moved through his life with careful attention. He went shopping, did small errands, and interacted politely with neighbors. On the surface, he appeared completely ordinary, blending seamlessly into the daily rhythm of the neighborhood. But under the surface, he was always watching. He memorized the gang members' faces, their numbers, the times they moved. even the routes they took when walking through the streets. Every tiny detail mattered. Every observation could one day be the difference between chaos and control. The gang, thinking he was just a quiet, unassuming man, grew bolder. One evening, as twilight descended, a group of them gathered near his house again. They shouted insults and left trash scattered across the yard. A neighbor peered through the curtains, whispering in fear about calling someone to stop this madness. But the man didn't panic. He watched. He waited. He knew that the gang had underestimated him. They believed strength was loud, that a man must respond immediately to show he could defend himself. They didn't know that real strength often hides beneath the surface. In his past, he had faced far more dangerous enemies, situations that demanded patience, strategy, and precision. The difference between survival and disaster had often been the ability to wait, to learn, and to act only when the moment was right. That night, he checked the house carefully. Every lock was secure, every door reinforced. He made sure the windows were protected and quietly prepared for any attempt to escalate. He didn't want violence, but he knew that sometimes defense required action. He reflected on the way the gang operated, their patterns, their overconfidence. They were reckless, untrained, and blind to the consequences of underestimating him. The gang returned night after night, thinking they were testing him. Each time he observed silently. He began noticing small weaknesses in their movements, inconsistencies in their coordination. One was always late, another easily distracted. Some of them were brash, acting before thinking, while others followed blindly. He cataloged these traits carefully, not out of anger, but because knowledge gave power. Knowledge gave control. The quiet man also thought about his neighbors. He could see their fear, their unease. Most of them would never be able to handle a gang directly. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives, and that was enough. They didn't need to be involved. But he also felt a sense of responsibility, not out of obligation, but because he could act, because he knew what needed to be done, and no one else had the skill to protect themselves. During the day, he began subtle preparation beyond just observation. He cleared the yard, moved obstacles to allow better visibility, and made sure escape routes were clear. Every little detail mattered. He didn't want confrontation, but he was ready for it if necessary. At the same time, he maintained normality. He smiled politely at neighbors, mowed the lawn, watered the plants. He projected calm, even peace, while quietly preparing for what might come. One afternoon, the gang tried a different tactic. They approached his property while he was outside, pretending to be casual passers-by. They made rude comments, laughed mockingly, and tested his reactions. Most people would have been angry, perhaps shouting or confronting them. But he didn't respond. He stood quietly, tall and steady, letting them speak, letting them believe they had control. Inside, his mind was sharp, calculating every movement, every word. He noticed who led the group, who followed, and who seemed unsure. He understood their weaknesses and strengths, even if they didn't understand their own. The gang, frustrated by his lack of reaction, left eventually, thinking he was simply too scared to respond. They didn't realize that by appearing calm, he was holding the real power. Most people equate aggression with strength, but he knew that composure, observation, and discipline often mattered more than shouting or violence. That night, he reflected on his past again. Memories of training, missions, and intense experiences surfaced. He remembered times when a single mistake could cost lives, when patience and strategy were the only way to survive. Those experiences had taught him more than combat. They had taught him self-control, resilience, and the importance of assessing every situation before acting. Those lessons, he knew, would be invaluable if the gang tried to escalate further. The quiet man also considered the psychology of his enemies. People like the gang often relied on fear, on assumptions, and on underestimating others. They had no idea what they were dealing with. They saw only a calm, quiet man and assumed he was weak. But beneath that calm was a mind trained for danger, a body prepared for action, and a patience that could outlast even the most persistent threats. Days passed, and the gang's harassment continued sporadically. Sometimes it was loud, sometimes subtle, but it was always there, a shadow over the neighborhood. The quiet man never retaliated openly. Instead, he used each incident as a chance to learn more. He noticed which houses they passed without attention, which neighbors they ignored, and which gestures made them angry. Every detail helped him understand the bigger picture. Neighbors watched in awe. Some started noticing subtle changes. He seemed more alert, more prepared. His eyes, calm yet piercing, seemed to miss nothing. There was a quiet authority about him, a presence that commanded respect without a single word. People began to wonder who he really was, what he had done, and why he was so composed in the face of danger. But he revealed nothing. He said nothing. He simply carried on with life, observing and preparing silently. The gang, unaware of their mistake, decided to escalate again. One night, they threw objects onto his lawn and shouted threats from the street. Most people would have called for help, run away, or retaliated. But he didn't flinch. He calmly watched from inside, noting their numbers, their positions, their behavior. He prepared mentally for the possibility of a confrontation, but he also knew that timing mattered. Acting too early could give them an advantage, while waiting allowed him to control the situation completely. Throughout it all, he kept his humanity intact. He didn't hate them, didn't seek revenge. He understood that their actions came from ignorance and insecurity, from a desire to feel powerful in a world where they had little control. He didn't let their hatred consume him. Instead, he focused on protecting his life, his home, and indirectly his neighbors. His daily life continued alongside the tension. He ran errands, worked on projects around the house, and even engaged in small talk with neighbors. All the while, he remained aware, vigilant, and ready. Every movement of the gang, every whisper in the neighborhood, every subtle sign of potential danger was catalogued in his mind. He was preparing quietly for the moment when he would need to act decisively, and deep down he knew that day was coming. The gang had already shown their true nature. They were reckless, overconfident, and persistent. But he had something they did not: training, experience, patience, and an understanding of strategy far beyond their comprehension. They believed they had the advantage, but they were blind to the reality. He had already anticipated their next moves, already considered the outcomes, already prepared for what might come. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he looked out at the street one last time. The neighborhood seemed quiet, almost serene. Yet he knew that calm could be temporary. Danger, he understood, often lurked where least expected, and he was ready in mind and body to face it when the time came. He didn't seek conflict, but he did not fear it. He had prepared, he had observed, and he would act with precision when necessary. The quiet man's life continued, seemingly ordinary on the outside, but underneath, a careful strategy was unfolding. The gang, unaware of the storm they had triggered, continued their harassment, oblivious to the force they had challenged. And the man, composed and patient, waited silently, knowing that one day, the situation would demand a decisive response, a response that would change everything. The quiet man knew the gang would keep testing him. Their harassment had become a rhythm in the neighborhood, a pattern he could predict if he paid close attention. He had spent weeks observing them, learning their habits and analyzing their weaknesses. Yet even as he planned, a part of him reflected on who he had once been and the life he had left behind. Most people didn't know the truth. They assumed he was just a quiet man, the kind who kept to himself and lived peacefully. They had no idea what he had once done, the life he had lived before settling into this calm neighborhood. In the military, he had been part of a team that faced the most dangerous situations imaginable. Missions that required precision, courage, and a level of endurance few could comprehend. He had been trained to remain calm under extreme pressure, to read situations quickly, and to act decisively when necessary. Every movement, every decision, every instinct had been honed over years of rigorous training and high-stakes experience. He had learned that fear could be managed, that patience could be a weapon, and that observation was often more valuable than action. Most people assumed that the calm man in their neighborhood had chosen simplicity because it was easy, but they were wrong. He had chosen peace deliberately, after years of chaos and danger. He had chosen a life where he could walk down the street without constant threats, where he could enjoy small pleasures like tending to his plants, walking in the evening, or drinking coffee in silence. But peace didn't mean weakness. He carried the strength and skill of his past within him, even if no one could see it. As the gang continued their harassment, he realized that the time might soon come when observation and patience would no longer be enough. He would need to act, but he would not act recklessly. Acting without strategy was dangerous, and he had learned that lessons the hard way. He began to prepare in ways the neighbors would never notice. At first it was small, arranging furniture for better visibility, reinforcing doors and windows quietly, and planning multiple ways to move through his home safely if he needed to respond quickly. He also prepared mentally. He revisited techniques he had learned years ago, exercises that kept the mind sharp and alert. He ran scenarios in his head, imagining the gang's possible actions and considering the best ways to respond without unnecessary risk. He knew that most people overreacted in fear or anger, which only made situations worse. He had learned to control both his body and his mind, to act with precision when required. While preparing, he reflected on the psychology of the gang. People who bully, intimidate, or harass often rely on fear, assuming that others will act impulsively. They underestimate patience, they underestimate skill, and they underestimate experience. This realization allowed him to see them clearly. They were predictable, overconfident, and reckless. They had power only because they assumed he was weak. That assumption would soon prove to be their greatest mistake. During the day, he maintained his calm, ordinary life. He interacted politely with neighbors, smiled at children playing in the streets, and went about errands as if nothing had changed. On the surface, he was the same quiet man they had always seen. But underneath, he was preparing. Every trip outside, every casual interaction, every observation of the gang's movements added to his knowledge. He noticed who led the group, who followed, and who was easily distracted. Each detail gave him more insight, more control. Sometimes memories from his past would come unbidden. He remembered missions that required him to enter dangerous territory quietly, to assess threats carefully, and to act only when the right moment arrived. He remembered the physical challenges, the mental challenges, and the responsibility of knowing that mistakes could cost lives. These memories were not meant to glorify the past, but to remind him of the skills he still carried. Skills that no ordinary gang could match. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of red and purple, he looked at the street outside his home. The gang was there as usual, their shadows stretching across the sidewalk. They shouted, they laughed, they left small pieces of trash as a warning. Most people would have felt terror or frustration. He felt neither, he observed. He noticed their positions, the timing of their movements, the way some members glanced nervously at others. He cataloged everything silently, mentally preparing for the day he might need to respond. He also considered the neighbors. Many of them were afraid, unsure how to handle the situation. He could see the worry in their eyes as they peeked from behind curtains or whispered in small groups. Some had suggested calling the police repeatedly, but he knew that while law enforcement could sometimes help, real control required strategy and understanding. He decided to bear the responsibility quietly, not seeking recognition or praise. Protecting his home and, indirectly, his neighbors was enough. Preparation wasn't only physical and mental, it was also emotional. He reminded himself that his goal was not revenge. The gang's actions were meant to provoke fear and anger, but he refused to let them succeed. He had learned that reacting with emotion often led to mistakes. He would act if needed with discipline and precision, but he would not let hate or fear dictate his choices. This control, more than anything else, would give him the advantage. Over the next few days, the gang continued their harassment. Sometimes it was loud, shouts in the street, objects thrown near his home. Sometimes it was subtle, graffiti, broken mailboxes, or threats left on neighbors' doors. Each incident provided more information, more insight into their weaknesses and habits. He remained calm throughout, blending into his routine while quietly preparing for the inevitable escalation. He also practiced his physical readiness. While most people ran for exercise, he trained to be ready for unexpected challenges. His movements were precise, controlled, and efficient. Every exercise was deliberate, every repetition a reminder of the discipline and strength he still carried. Years of training had not faded. They had only become a quiet force ready to emerge if necessary. As the gang grew bolder, the man knew the situation was approaching a critical point. Their confidence was building on the assumption of his weakness, their actions more reckless with each passing day. But he had no intention of confronting them blindly. He planned to act only when he had complete control, when he could neutralize the threat without unnecessary risk or chaos. His preparation was silent but thorough. the kind that only someone with experience in life or death situations could truly understand. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit quietly, reflecting on the balance between his past and present. He had chosen a life of peace, yet peace did not mean vulnerability. The gang had shown their true nature, and if they continued, confrontation would be unavoidable. But he did not fear it. He had faced danger before, in circumstances far more extreme than vandalism and threats. This was different, yes, but his skills, his discipline, and his patience gave him confidence. Neighbors, unaware of his past, began noticing subtle changes. He seemed more alert, more aware, almost as if he could see through the chaos around him. Some whispered about it, speculating about who he really was. Others simply admired his composure, not understanding the depth behind it. They could not know the full truth, that he was a man shaped by experiences that had honed his mind and body to a level far beyond ordinary people. One night, after the gang had left once again, he walked through his home, checking locks, observing the surroundings, and planning for every possible scenario. He thought about the lessons he had learned in his previous life: patience, observation, discipline, and timing. Every skill had a purpose, and every preparation was a piece of a larger strategy. He understood that when the moment came, he would act decisively, using knowledge, experience, and precision to control the outcome. Even in quiet moments, he reflected on the principles that had guided him throughout his life. Strength, he knew, was not in aggression alone. It was in discipline, restraint, and the ability to act when the situation demanded it. He had been trained to survive, to protect, and to act efficiently, and now those lessons were being quietly applied to his life in this neighborhood. The gang had no idea the depth of their mistake, nor did they realize how completely unprepared they were to face someone like him. As part 3 of his story closes, the calm man remained outwardly ordinary, blending into the neighborhood as he had for months. But beneath the surface, preparation was complete. Observation had turned into strategy, patience had become readiness, and the quiet strength of a trained mind and body waited, silent and invisible, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Soon, the gang would discover that appearances were deceiving, and that even the quietest man could be the most dangerous one to underestimate. The quiet man had been patient for weeks. He had observed, analyzed, and prepared, and now the time had come. The gang had grown careless, their overconfidence making them predictable. They thought they could intimidate him forever, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Tonight, they would find out in a way they never expected. It began like any other evening. The sky was dim, painted with shades of deep orange and purple as the sun set. Most neighbors were inside, some nervously peering through curtains, whispering about the gang's latest actions. Outside, the gang gathered near his house, laughing loudly, throwing small pieces of trash and shouting insults. They were brazen, believing their previous actions had left him weak, frightened, and unable to respond. The quiet man watched from a distance inside his home, his movements deliberate and calm. He had studied every member of the gang, their strengths, their weaknesses, the way they reacted under pressure. He knew who led the group, who followed blindly, and who was easily distracted. He had planned each possible scenario in his mind, ready to respond with precision. This was not recklessness. It was preparation perfected by years of experience. He stepped outside slowly, not in fear, not in anger, but in quiet control. The gang noticed him, expecting hesitation, expecting intimidation. Instead, they saw a man standing tall, composed, and unflinching. For the first time, some of them paused, sensing something different. There was a calm authority in his eyes, a presence that demanded attention without a word. One of the gang members tried to approach, thinking he could provoke a reaction. He shouted insults, waved his arms, and leaned threateningly close. The quiet man didn't move quickly, didn't shout, didn't raise his voice. He simply watched, measuring, timing, calculating. Every subtle movement mattered, every gesture counted. The man's calmness was unsettling. It was the kind of calm that made people unsure, the kind of calm that suggested hidden strength. The gang laughed nervously, sensing something they couldn't see. Their confidence wavered slightly, but they didn't stop. They continued with small acts of vandalism, tossing objects near the yard, scratching a fence, leaving messages on the mailbox. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have reacted impulsively, shouting, chasing, or making a mistake in anger. But he did not. He was in complete control, ready to act with precision if necessary. The confrontation began subtly. One gang member reached too far, trying to intimidate him with a shove. In a flash, the quiet man shifted, stepping aside, neutralizing the motion without a fight. It was quick, controlled, and almost effortless. The member stumbled, surprised, and the others froze. For the first time, they realized they were not facing a man to be underestimated. He didn't attack. He didn't need to. His presence, his discipline, and his calculated movements created a sense of confusion and fear in the gang. They didn't understand why he wasn't afraid, why he didn't lash out, why he remained calm while they had acted recklessly for weeks. Their own mistakes were exposed. Their overconfidence turned into uncertainty. He continued to move with measured precision. Every step he took was deliberate, designed to maintain control without escalating violence unnecessarily. He approached a member who had thrown trash, gently but firmly taking control of the situation and redirecting it. The gang members glanced at each other, unsure how to respond, realizing that their usual tactics no longer worked. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, amazed at the change. The quiet man, whom they had assumed was timid and unremarkable, was now showing an unmistakable authority. They could see that he was not only in control, but that he had the skill and confidence to enforce it if needed. It wasn't brutality. It was strategy, patience, and the discipline of a trained mind and body. The gang tried to regroup, thinking they could intimidate him with numbers. But the quiet man had anticipated this. He positioned himself strategically, creating a psychological advantage. Each gang member's movement was countered subtly. Every attempt at aggression met with precise, calm intervention. It was a demonstration of skill that left the gang disoriented. They were strong only because they assumed weakness, and now that assumption was shattered. For hours, the tension continued. The gang attempted minor harassment, each move met with quiet precision. One by one, their confidence eroded. Some members whispered to each other, unsure of how to handle a man who refused to react with fear or anger. They had believed that shouting and vandalism would intimidate him, but they didn't understand discipline, patience, and strategy. They didn't understand the power of observation combined with skill. Finally, the gang began to retreat. Their threats had lost weight, their gestures lacked force, and their confidence had evaporated. The quiet man had not struck a blow, had not inflicted harm unnecessarily, but he had demonstrated control. He had shown that he was not someone to provoke, that patience, preparation, and precision could dismantle arrogance and aggression without chaos. Neighbors came outside slowly, cautiously, to see the aftermath. They were amazed at the man's composure. He stood tall, calm, and unshaken, the quiet hero who had defended not just his home but the peace of the neighborhood. Some whispered, still unsure of who he really was. Others nodded in respect, recognizing a strength that went beyond ordinary understanding. The quiet man returned inside, locking doors and windows as usual. He didn't celebrate, didn't boast. There was no need. His actions had spoken for themselves. He had shown that the gang could no longer intimidate him, that their threats held no power, and that discipline and strategy could overcome recklessness. He had acted decisively but not recklessly, demonstrating the power of a controlled mind and body. As he sat in the living room, reflecting on the evening, he realized that the gang's harassment had revealed something important. People often judge others by appearances, by the calm exterior, the quiet demeanor. They assume weakness, ignorance, or lack of experience. But appearances can be deceiving. Strength often hides in silence, discipline, and observation. The gang had learned this lesson too late, and the quiet man had remained in control throughout. He thought about his neighbors, their fear, and their relief. He didn't act for recognition, for praise, or for revenge. He acted because it was necessary, because he had the skill, the experience, and the responsibility to do so. He had demonstrated that courage and intelligence were more powerful than reckless aggression, that preparation and patience could outmatch impulsive violence. The night passed quietly after that. The gang had retreated, their presence diminished for now. The neighborhood slowly returned to a state of calm, though the memory of the confrontation lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Even from a distance, they realized that the quiet man they had underestimated was far more capable than they could have imagined. In the days that followed, the quiet man continued his routines, maintaining the peace and order of his home and the neighborhood. He did not need to continue confrontation. The gang had learned their lesson. They avoided his property, their confidence shaken by the calm authority he had displayed. His presence alone was now a deterrent, his preparedness and discipline speaking louder than words or threats. The quiet man understood that true strength was not in the force of confrontation, but in the control of the situation. He had neutralized the threat without unnecessary harm, preserving both his home and the dignity of all involved. He had shown that courage, patience, and discipline could overcome recklessness and arrogance, and he had done so with quiet authority. Neighbors continued to whisper about what they had seen. Some speculated about his past, others admired his composure. Few could understand the depth of his experience, the years of training and missions that had prepared him for such a moment, but they all recognized the result. A calm, disciplined man had defended his home and the neighborhood with unmatched precision and strategy. Even as life returned to normal, the quiet man remained vigilant. He knew that threats could arise again, that danger could come from unexpected places, but he also knew that he was ready, that his patience, observation, and preparation had created a level of control few could challenge. He had faced the storm and emerged with discipline and strength intact. As Part 4 closes, the quiet man's actions had changed the dynamic of the neighborhood. The gang no longer held power, and respect for him grew silently among neighbors. He remained calm, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in capability. The confrontation had ended, but the story was far from over. Lessons had been learned, respect had been earned, and the quiet man continued to live with vigilance, strength, and unwavering composure. After the confrontation, the neighborhood began to feel a calm it hadn't known for weeks. The gang had retreated, their overconfidence shattered, their presence diminished. Most of the neighbors could hardly believe what had happened. They had watched from behind windows and fences, quietly witnessing a man they had underestimated demonstrate skill, courage, and control in a way they could never have imagined. The quiet man returned to his routines as if nothing had changed. He watered his plants, tidied his garden, ran errands, and greeted neighbors politely. On the surface, he was the same ordinary man he had always appeared to be. But beneath that calm exterior, he was aware of every movement, every sound, every possibility. The events of the past weeks had not made him reckless, but they had reinforced his focus. Vigilance, he knew, was a form of strength. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes in their environment. The streets felt safer, the tension eased, and a quiet respect seemed to linger wherever the man went. Some whispered about his past, speculating on who he really was, while others simply admired the way he carried himself. He did not seek recognition, did not boast or tell stories of what had occurred. His actions had spoken for themselves, and that was enough. The gang did not return. For weeks they stayed away, their arrogance replaced by caution. Their attempts to intimidate or harass anyone in the neighborhood had ceased. The quiet man had not sought revenge or tried to humiliate them. Instead, he had acted with precision, restraint, and intelligence. The lesson was clear. Aggression could be met with control. Recklessness could be countered with preparation. And appearances were often deceptive. In the aftermath, the man spent time reflecting on the events. He thought about his neighbors, about the fear that had lingered in their hearts, and about how small actions can ripple through a community. He realized that his own life, quiet and disciplined, had given him the ability to protect others without seeking recognition or reward. This understanding, he knew, was as important as any physical skill he possessed. Life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Children played in the streets, neighbors walked and talked openly, and the quiet man continued to go about his daily routines. Yet there was a new energy in the air. People walked with a sense of security, knowing that a steady, capable presence had protected their home and community. They did not need to understand the full story, nor did they need to know the depth of his experience. They only needed to feel the calm and confidence he exuded. Though outwardly calm, he continued his mental and physical preparation. Years of experience had taught him that safety and strength were not guaranteed. They were earned and maintained. He continued to exercise, to practice mindfulness, and to remain aware of the environment around him. These were habits, yes, but also a form of quiet vigilance. Life could be unpredictable, and he had learned that readiness was as important as restraint. Neighbors began to see him differently. Some approached him for advice, Some nodded in quiet acknowledgement when they passed, and others simply respected the way he carried himself. They did not need to know his full story, his past life of danger and discipline, to understand the impact he had made. The sense of safety he provided, the calm he radiated, was enough. His presence had transformed the neighborhood, not through fear, but through steady, controlled strength. Even the gang, if they had looked from a distance, would have seen the change. Their power had been diminished not by confrontation alone, but by strategy, patience, and calm authority. They had assumed strength came from aggression, but they had learned the hard way that real power often hides beneath a quiet exterior. The lesson was clear. Underestimating someone based on appearances could have serious consequences. The man reflected on what had happened and realized that his response had been guided by more than skill or training. It had been guided by understanding, by the ability to see beyond anger and aggression, and by the discipline to act in a way that ensured the safety of everyone around him. Courage, he knew, was not always loud or violent. Sometimes it was calm, precise, and quiet. Sometimes it was invisible until needed. He thought about his neighbors again, their fear, their relief, and now their respect. He did not act for recognition, but he understood that his actions had a lasting impact. By remaining calm and disciplined, he had not only protected his home, but also restored a sense of peace and security to those around him. That, he realized, was as important as any act of strength. Over the following weeks, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The man continued his routines, enjoying the small pleasures of his peaceful neighborhood. Morning walks, tending to plants, small interactions with neighbors, all of it grounded him in the life he had chosen. But the lessons of the past few weeks remained in his mind. He understood that vigilance, discipline, and patience were not just skills, they were principles that guided his actions and protected those around him. Neighbors now spoke in hushed admiration about the man who had faced a gang without fear or aggression. Some speculated about his past. Others simply marveled at his composure and presence. Yet he revealed nothing. His calm was genuine, his strength quiet. He did not need to prove anything. The respect and safety he had earned were their own rewards. In his quiet moments, he reflected on the balance of his life. Peace did not mean vulnerability, and calm did not mean weakness. He had learned to combine skill with restraint, observation with action, and patience with decisiveness. These lessons, hard-earned through years of experience, had allowed him to protect not only himself but also the community around him. That understanding was the foundation of his strength. The neighborhood began to thrive once more. Children played freely, neighbors conversed openly, and a sense of security returned. The quiet man's presence remained steady and unassuming, yet it was felt in every corner of the community. People may not have known the full story, but they felt the peace he had restored. His actions had transformed the environment not through fear but through confidence, discipline, and quiet heroism. Even in solitude, he remained vigilant. He knew that life could be unpredictable, that challenges could arise at any moment, but he also knew that preparation, patience, and composure were powerful tools. He did not need to display his skills or recount his past to anyone. The lessons he had learned, the discipline he had maintained, and the calm authority he had exercised were enough to ensure safety and respect. He reflected on the larger meaning of what had occurred. The gang had tried to intimidate, but they had underestimated a man who combined skill with patience, experience with discipline, and vigilance with composure. They had believed that appearances reflected reality, but they had learned that strength often hides quietly, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The quiet man had shown that courage is not always loud, that power does not always need to be visible, and that respect can be earned through control, restraint, and intelligence. Neighbors continued to talk quietly about the events, inspired by what they had witnessed. The quiet man did not seek praise, but he understood the subtle acknowledgement in their glances and gestures. He had acted not for recognition, but for the protection of his home and community, and in doing so, he had quietly reshaped the neighborhood, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed his calm authority. Life continued, ordinary on the surface, but transformed in ways that were hard to measure. The quiet man's presence had restored a sense of security, a reminder that strength and courage could exist without noise or violence. He had demonstrated that patience, preparation, and calm observation could overcome recklessness, that discipline could protect as effectively as aggression, and that heroism could be quiet yet undeniable. As Part 5 closes, the quiet man returned fully to his routines, tending to his home and neighborhood with a sense of fulfillment. The gang had gone, peace had returned, and respect had been earned, not through force but through discipline, preparation, and calm authority. He remained outwardly ordinary yet extraordinary in capability. His story was a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that courage takes many forms, and that the quietest people can sometimes make the greatest difference. The neighborhood thrived. Safety returned and life moved forward, subtly shaped by the actions of one disciplined man who chose to act with wisdom and courage. And though the man continued to walk quietly among his neighbors, he carried with him the lessons of patience, strategy, and calm. The traits that had turned fear into respect, threats into lessons, and chaos into order.